It started as just another trip into the wilderness. The explorer had been on dozens of journeys before, through caves, across deserts, and deep into abandoned towns. But something about this forest felt different. The locals spoke about it in hushed tones. They called it the Silent Woods, a place where the wind didn't blow and birds refused to sing. Most hikers avoided it. But for him, that only made it more tempting. He wasn't looking for danger. He was chasing stories. He filmed everything he found: old tunnels, forgotten railways, and long-lost buildings swallowed by nature. His small camera had become his companion. With it, he hoped to capture things that reminded people how strange and beautiful the world could still be. That morning, the forest was heavy with fog. The air was cold and the ground was soft from a week of rain. He followed a rough path that barely existed anymore. Broken branches hung across it and moss had covered every rock. According to the map, he was heading toward a ridge that hadn't been explored in decades. Some old logging maps showed a clearing up ahead, but satellite images revealed nothing but endless green. He had heard rumors about something strange in this forest, something big, made of metal. Some said it was a crashed airplane. Others claimed it was an old military base. Nobody agreed on the details and nobody had real proof. But the idea of a secret buried in the middle of nowhere was enough to make him pack his gear and go. Hours passed as he pushed through the thick brush. His backpack dug into his shoulders and his boots were soaked. Still, he pressed on, stopping now and then to catch his breath and check his compass. The deeper he went, the quieter it became. No birds, no rustling leaves, only the sound of his own footsteps and the occasional snap of a twig. Then something strange happened. As he walked through a patch of tall ferns, he noticed that the ground beneath him wasn't soft soil anymore. It was hard, metallic. He knelt and brushed away the dirt. Beneath the moss was rusted steel. He frowned, tapping it lightly. The sound echoed hollow beneath his hand. He followed the metal surface, brushing away leaves as he went until the forest suddenly opened up. What he saw made him freeze. Rising out of the ground like a sleeping giant was the curved side of a massive ship. Not a small boat, not a wrecked barge, but an enormous cruise liner, its white paint peeling and streaked with rust. Trees grew right up to its hull, their roots wrapping around the steel like vines gripping stone. For a long moment he just stood there, stunned. His brain couldn't make sense of it. A cruise ship didn't belong here. There was no ocean, no river, not even a lake large enough to carry it. He checked his GPS again. The nearest body of water was more than 30 miles away. He turned on his camera, speaking softly as he filmed. "This can't be real," he said under his breath. There's a ship in the middle of the woods. I don't even know what to say right now." He walked around it slowly, recording every detail. The ship's name was worn off, but faint letters were still visible under the rust. Windows were cracked, and balconies were buried under fallen branches. The deck above was covered in moss and leaves. It looked like it had been here for decades. After a while, curiosity overcame fear. He searched for a way inside. Near the base of the hull, a section of metal had been torn open, maybe by time, maybe by someone before him. It was just large enough to crawl through. He hesitated for a second, then switched on his flashlight and climbed in. Inside, the air was damp and still. Dust floated in the beam of his light. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper, the kind that once might have been elegant. Chairs and tables were scattered around, their wooden legs swollen with moisture. A staircase led upward, its railing coated with rust. Every step creaked as he climbed. When he reached the upper deck, his flashlight revealed a wide hall with tall windows. Curtains hung in shreds. An old piano stood in one corner, its keys yellowed and warped. On one of the tables lay a glass half filled with dark water. It was as if time had simply stopped. He whispered to himself, "How did you get here?" He kept moving, taking short video clips as he explored. The dining area was still recognizable. Rows of tables, chandeliers hanging crookedly above them, and a bar counter at the far end. Bottles were still lined up behind it, their labels faded beyond reading. The floor was covered in fallen leaves that must have blown in through broken windows over the years. In one corridor, he found a series of cabins. Most doors were jammed, but a few opened with a hard shove. Inside one, he saw a bed frame, a cracked mirror, and an old suitcase that had burst open long ago. Papers were scattered across the floor, their ink smudged by water and time. One corner of the room was filled with strange green vines that had crept through a hole in the wall. He picked up a small booklet from the floor and flipped through it. It looked like an old passenger log, but most of the writing had faded. Only one thing was still readable, a name printed at the top, M.V. Borealis. He didn't know it then, but that name would stay with him for a long time. As he moved deeper into the ship, the atmosphere grew heavier. The silence was absolute. Every sound he made, every footstep, every breath, seemed to echo endlessly down the corridors. Once he thought he heard something shift far off, maybe a loose piece of metal moving. But when he turned his light in that direction, nothing was there. He tried not to think about how unsafe the structure probably was. The ship's body was old and corroded. Sections of the ceiling had collapsed and puddles of muddy water covered parts of the floor. Still, he kept going, drawn by a strange mix of awe and confusion. After a while, he reached a grand staircase that curved upward, just like the kind seen in luxury liners from old movies. It must have once been stunning, with polished railings and red carpet. Now the carpet was gone and the steps were slick with moss, but the structure was still intact, as if refusing to let time win completely. He stood at the bottom for a long time, shining his light up toward the shadows above. Something about the sight gave him chills. Not fear exactly, more like the feeling of standing inside a secret. Eventually, he made his way back to the opening he had crawled through. Outside, the light was already fading. The forest around the ship was quiet again, the air cool and damp. He looked back at the giant structure one last time before setting up camp a short distance away. That night, sitting beside a small fire, he replayed the footage on his camera. Every frame looked unreal. A cruise ship sitting silently in the heart of the forest, it didn't make sense. He zoomed in on the nameplate he had filmed, M.V. Borealis. He made a note to research it later. As darkness deepened, he could still see the outline of the ship in the distance, barely visible through the trees. It stood there like a monument from another world. He wondered how many people had ever laid eyes on it. Maybe none. Maybe he was the first in decades. Before he went to sleep, he recorded one last video message for his viewers. His voice was calm but filled with disbelief. "I don't know what this thing is doing here," he said softly, the firelight flickering on his face. "There's no water for miles, no sign that it was ever transported. But it's real. I touched it. I walked through it. It's a cruise ship sitting in the woods, and tomorrow I'm going back in." He ended the recording and placed the camera beside him. The night grew colder, and the forest stayed completely still. Somewhere in the distance, a faint metallic sound echoed, like a slow groan of shifting steel. He sat up listening. It came again, faint but unmistakable, from the direction of the ship. He stared into the darkness for a long time before lying back down. Maybe it was just the wind, he told himself, but deep down he wasn't sure there was any wind at all in this place. When morning came, fog had rolled in again. The ship looked even larger now, half hidden by the mist. He packed his things, took one last look, and whispered, "I'll find out who you are." Then he switched on his camera, stepped toward the giant hull once more, and disappeared into the fog. The fog still hung low that morning, thick enough to blur the trees. The explorer's breath came out in white clouds as he stepped closer to the strange ship once again. Dew clung to his jacket and hair, and his boots sank slightly into the wet earth. For a moment, he stood still, just looking at it. The massive structure rose out of the mist like some forgotten monument, silent and lifeless, yet impossible to ignore. He switched on his camera and whispered, "Day 2. I'm going back inside." His voice trembled slightly, not out of fear, but awe. The ship had haunted his thoughts all night. He couldn't shake the image of that grand staircase or the faint metallic sound he'd heard before falling asleep. He found the same opening in the hull, brushed aside the damp vines that had grown over it, and crawled through. The air inside felt cooler than before, heavy with moisture and a strange smell, a mix of rust, mold, and salt. It was like stepping into another world. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness. The same corridor stretched ahead of him, silent and still. His footsteps echoed softly against the metal floor. This time he moved slower, trying to notice every detail he had missed the day before. On the left side of the hallway, he spotted an old metal sign half covered in grime. He wiped it with his sleeve until the letters showed through. Deck B, passenger cabins. He followed it. carefully stepping around puddles that shimmered faintly in the light. The cabins looked untouched since his last visit. Some had doors that had fallen off their hinges. Others were sealed tight, swollen shut by years of dampness. He peeked into one that was half open and found something he hadn't noticed before. Photographs scattered across the floor. The edges had curled and the faces were faded, but he could still make out smiling people posing on a sunny deck, drinks in hand, the sea stretching behind them. He picked one up carefully and held it closer to the light. A family stood arm in arm, 2 parents, a small boy, and a girl holding a stuffed toy. The image was old, probably from the 1970s. He tucked it into his pocket, planning to research it later. The deeper he went, the more unsettling the silence became. It wasn't just the absence of noise, it was the feeling that the air itself was holding its breath. Every few steps, his flashlight caught glimpses of small details that made the place feel strangely human. An open book left on a table, a child's shoe near a wall, a broken watch with its hands frozen at 3:47. He whispered to his camera, "It's like everyone just vanished." After a while, he reached the ship's dining hall. The sight made him stop again. Even after all this time, it was easy to imagine how grand it must have been. Long tables stretched across the room, their cloths long gone, but the silverware still scattered here and there. A faded chandelier hung above, its crystals dull but still catching bits of light from his flashlight. At the far end of the room stood the bar counter. Behind it were rows of dusty bottles. Some were still sealed, their labels too faded to read. He placed the camera on the counter, letting it record while he looked around. The piano he'd seen yesterday sat in the corner, its lid half open. Out of curiosity, he pressed one key gently. To his surprise, it made a soft sound, a deep broken note that echoed through the hall and faded slowly into the distance. He smiled a little. "Guess you've still got some life in you," he murmured. He found a narrow staircase leading down marked service area. The steps creaked under his weight as he descended. The lower deck was darker and colder. Pipes ran along the ceiling, dripping occasionally. In one small room, he found rows of lockers, each with a number painted on it. Some were open, revealing uniforms, white shirts and black vests once worn by the crew. One locker still had a name tag attached. The letters were almost gone, but he thought he could make out H. Alvarez or something similar. Inside it, he found a metal box. When he opened it, there were papers, shift schedules, maintenance notes, and what looked like a small journal. Most of the writing had faded, but a few lines were still legible. "Engines stopped. No contact for 2 days. Captain says we wait." The storm came faster than anyone thought. The explorer frowned, flipping through the rest of the pages, but the rest was water damaged. He tucked the journal into his backpack. When he came back up, he decided to explore the upper decks. The climb was steep, and some parts of the staircase had rusted away completely. He had to hold onto the railing to keep his balance. The sound of his footsteps echoed again, bouncing off the metal walls. Finally, he reached the top deck. The air felt fresher there. Large trees surrounded the ship, their branches stretching almost over the railings. Leaves had gathered across the deck like a soft carpet. He could see the forest stretching endlessly in every direction, and for a moment he felt small. He walked toward the bow where the ship's name had once been painted. He brushed away dirt and moss until the letters appeared more clearly. MV Borealis, the same name he had seen on the booklet yesterday. He turned his camera toward himself. "I found the name again, Borealis. I'll have to look this up when I get home. There's got to be a record of it somewhere." He explored further and found what looked like a control room. The windows were fogged, but through them he could see endless trees. The control panels inside were covered in dust. Some buttons had rusted and the old steering wheel stood still, its brass dull and green. He sat down in the captain's chair for a moment. It creaked under his weight. The silence here was different. It felt heavy, like the ship still carried the memories of every person who had once worked there. He found another logbook lying open on the table. The pages were damp, but a few words stood out. One entry read "Lost power. Emergency beacon not responding. Drifting north. Awaiting assistance." Another page was dated the next day and simply said, "Land sighted." He froze when he read that line. Land sighted? That made no sense. If this ship had been stranded at sea, how could it have ended up deep in a forest? He looked up at the ceiling as if expecting an answer. None came. The day passed quickly as he explored more of the ship. He found a small theater with torn red seats, a kitchen filled with rusted pots, and a pool that had long since dried up. Nature had taken over everything, roots breaking through walls, vines hanging from ceilings, moss growing where water had once been. Every discovery made him feel both thrilled and unsettled. It was beautiful, yes, but it also felt wrong, like the ship didn't want to be found. As the sun began to set, he made his way outside again. The forest had grown darker and the air was cool. He sat at the base of the ship and ate a quick meal from his pack, his camera still rolling beside him. He spoke softly into the lens. "I don't know how this ship ended up here, but I can tell it's been decades. Everything inside looks untouched since the day it stopped moving. Whoever was on it, they must have left in a hurry." He paused, listening to the forest. For a moment he thought he heard the faintest sound coming from inside the ship again, a slow metallic thud, like something shifting deep within. He turned quickly, flashlight in hand, but the opening was empty. Only the wind moved through the trees. Still the sound lingered in his mind. He shook it off, packed his gear, and started walking back to his small camp. Every few steps he looked over his shoulder at the towering ship. Even half hidden in shadow, it looked majestic and haunting. When he reached his tent, he replayed some of the footage. His camera had captured something he hadn't noticed before. In one of the frames from earlier that day, when he had filmed the control room window, there was a faint reflection in the glass, a shape that looked almost human standing behind him. He froze, staring at the screen. Then he rewound and played it again. The reflection was there just for a second, then gone. Maybe it was his own shadow, maybe a trick of the light, but deep down he wasn't sure. He sat in silence for a long time, the crackle of the campfire the only sound around him. Finally, he spoke into the darkness, not to the camera this time, but to himself. "There's something about this place," he whispered. "It's not just a mystery, it's like it's waiting for something." The forest stayed quiet. No animals moved. No wind blew. As the night settled in, the explorer stared into the glowing embers of the fire. He knew one thing for certain: he wasn't done yet. Tomorrow he would go back inside. There was more to this story, and he was going to find it, no matter what waited beyond those rusted walls. When the explorer returned home, the strange images of the ship followed him everywhere. Even when he tried to rest, his mind replayed every sound, every shadow, every creak from inside that massive metal body lying silently in the woods. He knew he had found something extraordinary, something no one could explain, but he also knew he needed proof before anyone would believe him. The next morning, he sat at his small desk with his laptop open. The air in his apartment felt still and quiet, like the calm before a storm. He plugged in his camera, downloaded all the videos, and began to watch them one by one. The footage looked even more surreal on a large screen. Seeing himself walk through that silent dining hall, past the piano and broken chandeliers, made his chest tighten. It all looked too real to be coincidence. He paused when he reached the part where he'd filmed the control room window. There it was again, that faint reflection, that shadowy figure standing behind him for a split second before disappearing. He zoomed in, trying to make sense of it, but the image blurred into a mess of pixels. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Or maybe not. He shook his head and focused on something else, the name of the ship. MV Borealis. That was his next clue. He opened a search engine and typed it in. MV Borealis cruise ship history. Thousands of results appeared, but most of them were about a modern vessel by the same name. He refined the search, adding 1970s and abandoned. Finally, buried several pages deep, he found a few scattered mentions of an older ship built in 1976. It had been operated by a company that no longer existed, a cruise line that had gone bankrupt decades ago. According to an archived newspaper article, the Borealis had been retired after a severe storm in 1982. The ship had reportedly suffered heavy engine damage in the North Atlantic, and passengers were rescued by another vessel. After that, it was supposedly sold for scrap. But there was a problem. The article ended there. No record of where it was taken for dismantling. No mention of who bought it. Nothing about where it ended up. It was as if the ship had simply vanished from every official document after that. The explorer leaned back in his chair, frowning. How could a 500-foot cruise ship disappear? Even if it had been abandoned, someone should have reported it, tracked it, or at least photographed it. But all he found were half-finished reports and broken links. He decided to dig deeper. He spent the next few days contacting maritime databases, retired shipyard workers, and anyone who might have knowledge of old cruise liners. Most replies were short and unhelpful. Some didn't respond at all. But one evening, as he checked his inbox, he noticed an email from a man who claimed he had once worked at the shipyard where the Borealis was supposed to be dismantled. The message was brief. "I saw your footage. If that ship is real, it shouldn't exist. The Borealis never reached the scrapyard. We were told it sank during transport." That one line sent a chill through him. He replied immediately, asking for more details. The man, who said he was retired and living in a small coastal town, agreed to speak with him but refused to do it over email. "Too many things about that ship didn't add up," he wrote. "If you want answers, come talk in person." The explorer packed his camera and notes and took an early train the next morning. The trip took several hours through quiet countryside. The man lived near an old harbor town where rusted boats leaned against the docks like tired old ghosts. The air smelled of salt and oil. He found the man sitting on a bench overlooking the sea, a thin figure with gray hair and a weathered face. His eyes were sharp, though, full of the kind of focus that came from seeing too much. "You found the Borealis?" the old man asked quietly without even looking up. The explorer nodded. "In the middle of a forest. No river, no ocean nearby. It doesn't make sense." The man gave a faint, bitter smile. "No, it doesn't, and yet, it's not the first time strange things happened with that ship." He went on to explain that when the Borealis was decommissioned, it was to be towed to a scrapyard in Nova Scotia, but the tugboat that was supposed to bring it in returned without it. The official report said a violent storm had struck midway, and the tow cables had snapped. The ship supposedly drifted away and sank, but no wreck was ever found. "We searched for weeks," the man said, his voice low. "The Coast Guard, private divers, even the company's own crew. Nothing. It was like it vanished into thin air." The explorer frowned. "And no one questioned it?" "Oh, some of us did," the old man replied, glancing at him. "But the company went bankrupt a few months later. No one wanted to spend money looking for a lost ship that was already marked for scrap. It became just another forgotten story." He paused, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "But sometimes, late at night, I'd think about it. A ship that size doesn't just disappear. Maybe it didn't sink. Maybe it drifted somewhere else, somewhere it wasn't supposed to go." The explorer stayed quiet, the sound of waves filling the silence. The old man finally turned toward him. "If you really found it, son, be careful. Things that go missing for that long are missing for a reason." He thanked the man, recorded their conversation with permission, and left with more questions than answers. That night, back in his small motel room, he replayed the interview. The man's voice sounded steady, honest. He wasn't trying to scare him. He was warning him. The explorer opened his laptop again, now determined to find the original coordinates from the ship's final voyage. It took hours of searching through online archives and scanned documents, but eventually, he found something. A handwritten note from an old maritime log listing the last known coordinates of the Borealis before contact was lost. He copied them into his map software. His eyes widened when the location appeared on the screen. The spot was nowhere near where the ship was supposed to be. It wasn't in the ocean, it was on land. He checked again, certain it was a mistake. But every source led back to the same numbers. Either someone had entered false coordinates or something truly strange had happened. He leaned back, his mind racing. "Land sighted," he remembered reading from the logbook inside the ship. Could the crew have actually drifted toward land somehow? But how could a cruise liner travel miles inland without a single river large enough to carry it? Unable to sleep, he went over every theory he could think of. Maybe the storm had pushed it into a temporary floodplain. Maybe a landslide or massive flood had carried it further than anyone imagined. But every explanation felt thin, like trying to fit a puzzle piece where it didn't belong. The next morning, he uploaded a short teaser video to his channel, careful not to reveal the ship's exact location. In the clip, he showed the forest, the massive hull, and a few shots from inside. His voiceover was calm and steady, but full of disbelief. "I don't know how it got there, but it's real. The Borealis exists, and it's sitting miles from any ocean. The mystery is only beginning." Within hours, the video exploded online. Comments poured in from viewers around the world, some amazed, some skeptical, some calling it fake. A few even claimed they had seen something similar years ago while hiking in northern Canada. The attention both excited and unnerved him. He wanted the truth, not fame. But now the story had spread far beyond his control. Later that night, as he read through the flood of comments, he noticed a private message from an account with no profile picture. It simply said, "You're not the first to find it. Don't go back." He stared at the message for a long time. No name, no explanation. He checked the account. It had been created just minutes before sending the message, and then deleted right after. He felt a chill run down his spine. He closed his laptop and sat in silence, listening to the faint hum of the motel heater. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the windows. The image of the ship rose in his mind again, the way it loomed over the trees, the eerie quiet inside, the reflection in the control room window. He knew the message was meant as a warning, but it had the opposite effect. If someone didn't want him to return, that meant there was something left to find, something that still waited inside the Borealis, hidden beneath its rust and silence. He whispered to himself, "I'm going back." And with that, the decision was made. The next morning, the explorer woke up early. The air inside the abandoned cruise ship felt heavier than before. It was quiet, too quiet, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. He sat up, rubbing his eyes and listening. Somewhere deep in the corridor, metal creaked softly, like the ship was shifting its weight even though it hadn't moved in decades. He turned on his flashlight and checked his camera. The battery was still half full, but he didn't want to waste any power. He had a feeling he would need every bit of it. He took a few slow breaths, trying to calm his racing thoughts. What was this place really doing here? Who could have possibly built or brought a full-sized cruise ship this far inland? And why had no one ever spoken about it? After packing his bag, he decided to explore the upper decks again, this time focusing on the bridge. The control room might still hold clues about what happened. The steps creaked under his boots as he climbed. The morning sunlight filtered through the cracked windows, cutting across the dust and making it look like floating fog. When he reached the bridge, he found that it wasn't empty anymore. Someone had been there since last night. The control panel was wiped clean, and a few switches were flipped up. There were fresh footprints on the dusty floor, smaller than his. They led toward the captain's chair, then vanished behind a broken section of wall. He froze, his breath catching in his chest. He slowly stepped closer, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it echo in his ears. He whispered, "Hello?" But no one answered. For a long moment, he just stood there, staring at the chair. A faint smell of burnt plastic hung in the air, mixed with the dampness of rusted metal. On the dashboard, a single object rested, a torn piece of paper folded twice. He reached for it with shaking hands and unfolded it. There were only 3 words written in faded ink: "It's still alive." The explorer stared at the note, his mind spinning. What could that mean? Was someone talking about the ship itself? Or was there someone still here hiding? He quickly checked around the bridge but found nothing else. The controls were all dead, wires exposed, panels hanging loose. But one thing stood out: a faint hum coming from a small radio set bolted to the side wall. It was the only device that looked untouched by time. He turned the dial slowly, hearing bursts of static. Then for a brief second, a voice crackled through, distant, almost a whisper. "Stay away from the core." Then silence. He stepped back, almost dropping the radio. His hands were trembling, but curiosity pushed him to dig deeper. If there was a core, maybe it was part of the ship's engine or power source. But a ship that had been sitting in a forest for years shouldn't have any working core at all. He decided to follow the lower decks again. Maybe that's where the sound came from. The stairs down were dark and narrow, filled with dripping water and thick vines growing through the cracks. It smelled of earth and salt. Strange, considering how far they were from the sea. As he reached the engine room, he noticed something that made his stomach twist. The air was warmer down here. The metal walls pulsed slightly under the flashlight's beam, as if something beneath them was moving. The noise was faint but steady, a low rhythmic thump like a heartbeat. He crouched beside one of the large rusted pipes and placed his hand on it. The vibration ran through his palm, strong, alive. He whispered to himself, "That's impossible." He looked around for any logical explanation, maybe geothermal energy, or a generator that somehow hadn't died yet. But none of that could explain the faint blue light flickering deep inside the core chamber. The explorer moved closer. There was a sealed metal door, half open, its hinges rusted. On the other side, a strange glow spilled out, lighting up the hallway in a soft blue mist. He pushed it open just enough to see inside. There in the middle of the room stood a massive glass cylinder, cracked and covered in vines. Inside it, a dark shape floated, almost human but not quite. The blue light came from beneath the cylinder, pulsing gently like it was breathing. He stepped closer, unable to look away. The thing inside looked motionless, yet every few seconds the light flickered, and the shadow inside seemed to shift slightly. Suddenly, the radio in his pocket hissed to life again. The same voice returned, louder this time. "Do not touch it. It remembers." The explorer jumped, nearly dropping the radio. His mind flooded with questions. Who was speaking? And what did it mean by "it remembers"? He wanted to leave. Every instinct told him to run back to the forest and never come back. But something inside him, curiosity, obsession, maybe even destiny, made him stay. He spent the next hour searching the nearby control panels. Most were broken, but he found one switch still functional. It was labeled containment lock. He hesitated, staring at it. Maybe if he turned it off, he could learn more. Maybe it would explain what the ship really was. Before he could decide, the air shifted. The blue light flickered violently, and a loud metallic groan filled the room. The shape in the glass moved. Not slightly this time, and it turned, slowly, facing him. He stumbled back, his flashlight trembling. The shadow inside raised what looked like an arm, pressing it against the cracked glass. A faint pattern of symbols glowed across its surface, ancient and unreadable. Then, just as suddenly, everything went still again. The humming stopped. The light faded to nothing. He stood there, breathing hard, staring at the now dark cylinder. His flashlight beam caught something etched into the floor, a word carved deep into the metal. Project Nautilus. He quickly snapped a photo before retreating from the room. His legs felt weak, his mind buzzing with confusion. Whatever was inside that cylinder, it wasn't dead, and it wasn't human. Back on the upper deck, the air felt colder. The forest outside had gone quiet again. No wind, no birds, just the soft rustle of leaves against metal. He sat on the railing, trying to make sense of everything. He remembered the note. It's still alive. And now he understood. The ship wasn't just abandoned, it was holding something, protecting it, or maybe containing it. He checked his watch. He'd been inside for over 6 hours. The sky outside was dimming again, clouds rolling in. He had to leave before dark. He packed his bag, but before stepping off the deck, he glanced back one last time. The ship stood silent, surrounded by trees that looked older than time. Then, from deep inside the hull, came one last sound. A single echoing thud, like something massive had moved again. He didn't wait. He sprinted through the forest, his camera bouncing against his chest, heart racing. He didn't stop until the ship was completely out of sight. When he finally reached his campsite, he collapsed to the ground, breathing hard. He played back the photos on his camera, the deck, the bridge, the radio, the glowing core, but one image froze him in place. In the photo of the glass cylinder, just before the light went out, there was something in the reflection, a figure standing behind him, and he was sure he had been alone. He shut off the camera and sat there, staring at the forest as the first drops of rain began to fall. The sound of thunder rolled in the distance, deep and slow, like the heartbeat of something ancient waking up. He didn't sleep that night, and when morning came, he wasn't sure whether to go back or run as far away as possible. But deep inside, he knew he wouldn't stop. Whatever secret the ship was guarding, he had to uncover it, even if it meant facing whatever was waiting inside.